So on a dare, he goes up into the apartment. This kid goes up in the apartment, and he's going to like steal something out as kind of a proof that he went up there and he made it in there and made it out alive. But he ends up getting scared because the guy who was Sean Connery, this older man, scares him, and he drops his backpack and he runs out of the apartment. And later on, he sees his backpack hanging up in the window, and Sean Connery drops it down to him. And it ends up he has gone through all his notebooks, all these stories that he's written, that nobody's ever seen, and he's marked them up and said, like, this is no good. Okay, this is good. He's like grading them. It's like getting your personal work graded by a professor or something. So it ends up finding out that this old man is actually a writer who wrote, in the movie, it was like the greatest novel of the 20th century, and he wrote it like 50 years ago, but he never wrote a sequel, and everybody's been waiting for him to write a sequel ever since. So it turns out that this man has just sort of gone into hiding after he produced this great novel. And anyway, he teaches the young kid how to write and ends up forming this relationship, and he kind of brings him out into the open, and he ends up finally leaving his apartment and kind of re-engaging with the outside world a little bit. It's a neat movie. But at one point, Sean Connery, the character who, I guess his name is Forrester, I think, he ends up taking a story that he had already written, and he gives it to the kid and says, start typing this up. He teaches him how to type on his old typewriters. Apparently people used to use these, I don't know, before keyboards or something. He teaches them how to write on these keyboards, and he tells them to just start typing the story, and then once you get going, start to add your own stuff and create your own story. So he does that. So really the first paragraph is this story that he had already written, and he goes on to write the rest of it, and it's his own story. He ends up getting in trouble because it actually was a published work. He didn't know about it, and he turns it into his class and gets accused of forgery and everything. But I won't spoil the rest of the movie. But it was a neat illustration for me because he took something that he already written and said, start typing this up and start working on it. And then once you get going, then you can start your own work. And to me, it's a great sort of lesson, even in the Christian life, about getting started. Sometimes we need help just getting started. We don't know where to begin. We don't know what to do. So sometimes we need a guide to get us going. And after a while, we start to learn what it means to follow God, to follow Jesus. So those words, taste and see, I think are a great kind of go along with that illustration in that movie of just try it out. I guess that would be the lesson is just try it out and get started. And once you get going, you will learn new things. You can learn to make your faith your own. I think many of us, when we were growing up as children, maybe if you grew up in the church, you're given instructions, you're taught things in Sunday school, and then you get older and you realize, well, things are a little more complicated than they made it sound like in Sunday school. You start to make your faith your own, but you need a little bit of a start to get going. Prayer is like that. Sometimes we don't know how to pray. We don't know what to do when we start praying. When I started praying, I started to think, well, I got to pray for the whole world. And if I don't pray for the whole world, things are going to fall apart. So I'm like praying for Africa, I'm praying for Asia, I'm praying for everybody. And then I realized a little later, well, maybe I can be a little more specific about things and learn to start just talking, realize that my prayers started becoming just sort of a conversation with God, sort of talking about my day, talking about what mattered to me, just like a conversation you would have with anybody else. But, starting out, it wasn't exactly great prayers, but it took a while. So no one else can tell you really how to be a Christian. I mean, we learn, we take instruction, but until you taste and see for yourself, you won't really know what it's like. So I want to I'm going to start reading through the rest of this psalm and learn some other things. Sometimes I like to think about the psalms and who wrote them and what sort of situation were they in when they wrote these things. And sometimes we don't really know for sure. And it's hard to know, but in verse 11, he says, "Come, my children, and listen to me, and I will teach you to fear the Lord." And to me that says this is somebody that has been living with God for a while. This is an older person that understands what it's like to follow God. And so he says, "Come, my children." If you've read in the book of Proverbs, especially the beginning of Proverbs, there's a lot of this language. "Come, my child, I will teach you the fear of the Lord." And that's a very similar kind of saying here. "Come, my children, I will teach you the fear of the Lord." And so we can kind of sit before this psalm and say, this is somebody with experience, somebody that has learned over time, and we can learn from them. And so when he says, "I will teach you the fear of the Lord," the question that comes to me is, what is the fear of the Lord? What does it mean to fear God? I used to think it meant I just need to be afraid of God. I'm afraid he's going to zap me or something, like sometimes in the Old Testament, it's fire in and down. But I don't think that's what it means. And actually, the next few verses, he's going to explain what the fear of the Lord means. So let's read through those. In verse 12. "Does anyone want to live a life that is long and prosperous?" Anybody here want to be rich and live a long time? Probably not. Josh does. "Then keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn away from evil and do good. Search for peace and work to maintain it. The eyes of the Lord watch over those who do right. His ears are open to their cries for help." I think these verses explain what it means to fear God. Keep your tongue from speaking evil, your lips from telling lies. Turn away from evil and do good. It's a very sort of simple way of explaining things. It's sort of a little bit of a white and black sort of thing. And throughout the Psalms, you'll see a lot of this. There's the righteous and then there's the unrighteous. And that's the only two kind of people there are. And sometimes that's a little difficult to deal with. But I think that this person writing the psalm is saying there's a way of living that will produce a good life. There's a way of living that will keep some bad things from happening. And it's not always the case that just because you live right, that everything's going to work out just fine. But there are some ways of living. Guarding your tongue, that's a big one, right? That's a really big one. In the book of James where he says the tongue, no one can tame the tongue. The tongue is like the udder on a ship. A small little piece, but it controls where the whole ship goes. Guarding your tongue and keeping it from speaking evil, speaking lies, that's a life's pursuit. It takes a whole life to figure out how to do that. Turn away from evil, do good. There is sort of a simple way of looking at life here. That if you want good life, you need to do good things. If you're going to seek evil, things are probably not going to turn out so well. But I also really appreciate the word search for peace, seek peace, search for it. This is really important, and these actually sound a lot. If you read through the Old Testament laws, I know it's good bedtime reading. If your ox tramples your neighbor's vine, some sort of sacrifice needs to be made. Actually, most of the Old Testament laws, we think of them as, what do these mean? These things sound really weird. But most of them have to do with our relationships, either our relationships with each other or our relationship with God. That's really what the laws are about. Living at peace with each other and living at peace with God. And that's what he says here. Search for peace and work to maintain it. Those are noble efforts and important part of following God. Search for peace. So if we make our lives about seeking peace with each other and seeking peace with God, it will lead to good things. But another difficulty with these words, especially in verse 15, let's go ahead and read 15 through 18. The eyes of the Lord watch over those who do right. His ears are open to their cries for help. But the Lord turns his face against those who do evil. He will erase their memory from the earth. The Lord hears his people when they call to him for help. He rescues them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. these are great promises that God will watch over the righteous, those who do right. He will listen, but He will turn His face from those who do evil. But this leads to a bit of a difficulty, because a lot of the time in the Bible it seems like God is saying He will only take care of people who do what is right. He'll only take care of people who have their lives in perfect order. And a lot of times preachers will actually mislead people, because sometimes, especially young people or anybody, will find themselves in a difficult situation. And maybe the preacher or pastor will say, well, this is because you've sinned. You need to repent of sin. Now, that might be the case. Okay, if you cheat on your taxes and years later you get caught and you go to jail or you have to pay all this money, okay, that was your fault, right? Okay, you cheated on your taxes. There's going to be a result for that. But sometimes life's not quite so cut and dry. Sometimes things are a little bit more complicated. I hope it didn't make anybody nervous about cheating on taxes. Sure. Josh was saying something to Aubrey, so I don't know if that was...
Better address themselves.
Well, sometimes it doesn't seem like we've done anything wrong, and yet life doesn't turn out the way we thought it would or thought it should. Sometimes some of you might be waiting for God to hear you. Sometimes some of you might have been offering a prayer to God for years, but it seems like there's been no answer. Maybe you have a longing unfulfilled, or maybe it seems like you've done everything right, but life isn't turning out right. To be righteous what does it mean to be righteous? Is an important question. A lot of times we think it's just those who do good, those who just always do what's right. But that's not necessarily the only meaning of what it is to be righteous. Remember the story of Abraham in Genesis, when Abraham and Sarah didn't have children until they were like 90, and for years and years and years, imagine having a child at 90. For years and years and years, because Sarah was barren, she couldn't have children, and so God comes to Abraham one day and says, "This time next year, you're going to have a child. You're going to have a child. I'm going to come back in 1 year from now, and you will have a child." And Sarah laughs, okay, which is, kind of what most of us probably do. Yeah, right, okay, I'm going to have a child at 9 years old. But Abraham kind of doubts a little bit, but there's a great phrase in there where it says, Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. And that always struck me a little bit odd. Why does believing in God make you righteous? And actually that word reckoned, it really should be something like credited. It was credited to him as righteousness. This is like business language. It's sort of the, like if you're in debt and a business partner agrees to get you out of debt, it's credited to you as being in right standing with that person. Businesses, working at Lowe's over here, I learned that, you don't always have to sell everything at the list price. A lot of people, of course, we get people come in all the time, but, why don't you just cut that price down in half and I'll buy it, that kind of thing. I always love it when people come and do that, by the way. But, business is not always cut and dry, right? There's a lot of relationship stuff going on, and that's sort of what is going on with Abraham and God in that passage. Abraham is saying, okay, even though this seems impossible, I believe you that this time next year we're going to have a child. And when he believes, God credits that to him as righteousness. So it's not that Abraham lived a perfect life, that he always did what was right, that he always did what was good. It was that he believed God, he trusted God, that when God said he was going to do something, he was going to do it. And that was credited to him as righteousness. I think we need to remember that when we're thinking about what does it mean to be righteous. Righteousness is about being in a right relationship with God. And when we're in a right relationship with God, that sets a certain standard for our lives. And that's where doing what is good, doing what is right comes into play. it's really a response to what God has done for us. First, we have to believe. First, we have to believe that God will do what He says, what He promises. And then God will give us the power to live right, to live and do what is right, what is good. So maybe this has caused some thoughts for you. Maybe you've been thinking about things. Maybe you've been trying to figure out, am I living my life right? Why are things not turning out the way I wish they would? So let's just sit with that actually in prayer for just a moment. Maybe close your eyes and bow your heads and ask God, Lord, what is it that you're speaking to me right now? What is it that I've been asking you for but haven't been receiving? I've been praying to you, but it feels like you're not listening. Maybe it's time to offer that up to Him and say, I trust you. I trust that you're going to do what is right, that you will do what you say and what you promise. I'm going to choose to trust you, even though it seems impossible. Well, I forgot to get the climax where I shout and scream, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Actually, do we have any communion servers set up? Okay. If you want to go ahead and come up. I want to read the rest of this song. I think it really relates well to communion and what we do when we come and remember what Jesus has done. I'm actually going to ask you to just go ahead and put your offering up here when you come up for communion. I won't pass the baskets around, so it'll take about 20 seconds. Starting in verse 19, the righteous person faces many troubles, but the Lord comes to the rescue each time. For the Lord protects the bones of the righteous, not one of them is broken. Calamity will surely overtake the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be punished. But the Lord will redeem those who serve Him. No one who takes refuge in Him will be condemned. I just want to highlight two things. One thing is that verse about not one of his bones will be broken. If you remember in one of the Gospels, in John, when it talks about Jesus suffering on the cross, they go, actually it's getting late in the day, and they need to bring the prisoners down that have hung on the cross. It's not a very nice image, so it's a little gruesome, but they need to break the legs of those that are on the cross so that they can take them down before nightfall. And they come to Jesus, and He's already passed away. And so it says there in John, it says, this was to fulfill the Scripture, that not one of His bones would be broken. And so this verse speaks forward to that time when Jesus, He actually died more quickly than most people did on a cross. And I think that was God's grace a little bit, sparing Him from some of the pain. But the last line of the psalm, no one who takes refuge in Him will be condemned. And that's a great thing to remember as we take communion, that when we take refuge in Him, if you know anything about the land of Israel, there's these caves all up in the hills. There's all these little caves. And that's where people would hide whenever, to hide from trouble. And so that's what David was talking about when he says, find refuge in God. All these little caves were His little refuge. And we can do the same. There's different ways for us to take refuge. For me, it's always been to sort of hide in quiet time with God and remember His Word, to have personal time in prayer. But one of the ways that we take refuge in God is to take refuge in His sacrifice. We take refuge in what He has done. None of us will be condemned because we take refuge in Him. He has made that sacrifice, and He's bought us. And so we belong to God. So as we take communion this morning, let's remember that there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And let's take refuge in Him. He is a safe place, safe from all harm.